English translation, 688th contact. Part 1. Saturday, the 20th of August 2017, 21:52 hours.
Hello, greetings. I guess we will not have to go through the work of the 5 nights last week again now, which was quite consuming, yet important for the biography Bernadette is writing.
No, we do not have to.
It was worth it, though, because going through your father Svatha's annals and Asket's records was important. But be welcome, dear friend.
Thanks for your welcome and greetings, Edward. At our last work, I promised you that I would come today to answer your questions, which you have been asking me for the last few days. And since it is convenient for me today, I will come here to answer your questions. The whole thing is also meant to be an official conversation, I suppose.
Of course.
Good, then I will say this. It was actually a bit difficult with my father's handwritten notes, which unfortunately are also not complete, while Asket's were welcome easy to define. We do not have to go through the work we did again because I checked everything again myself and found no errors in the information given. What has to be said, though, I have to mention, is that there are many other facts to be mentioned than the ones we have listed, but everything would lead far too far.
Difficult it really was, but as I said, it was worth it, and also in the way that I was able to refresh and mobilize my memories. Due to my health breakdown in the 1980s and the partial amnesia I suffered as a result, a lot of things had disappeared from my memory, but now I have been able to reconstruct them and recall them, and I can probably also continue to do so in some relationships. On the whole, I had mainly dealt with the issues surrounding the mission, while I neglected the personal issues because I did not consider them to be very important. But now I am glad that we were able to recall so much from my past, not only for my own memories, but also in relation to the biography that Bernadette is writing about my personality. She already said that my whole life story, which cannot be complete but can only contain the very most important facts, would need several volumes.
Which she is probably right about. And that our joint work of recollection and fact-telling has on the one hand been of great benefit to yourself, but on the other hand is also of great importance for your biography. That is not to be doubted.
That, I think, is unquestionable. But what do you actually think about all the storms that keep hitting Europe and also Eurasia? Is there anything that can be done about them to avoid even worse damage caused by these huge storms?
It is too late for that, because the time has now come, which the old prophecies have already announced, but which also your and my father's predictions in the 1940s and 1950s have set out, as well as your multiple warnings to the governments and media all over the world, whereupon you were only called a fantasist and a do-gooder and a crank and a lunatic. Until the beginning of the 1970s, there would have been time enough to introduce the necessary measures in the form of a worldwide birth stop and a comprehensive and also worldwide rigorous birth control, as well as to put an end to the destructive machinations against nature, but nothing of the kind was done. All the destruction of nature since then, precisely since the 1940s and 1950s, has resulted from the machinations of the inexorable growth of overpopulation, which has demanded ever more destructive interventions in nature and brought about tremendous changes in it, which ultimately led to climate upheaval, the effects of which are very varied and have not yet been recognized by scientists in their full extent. The destruction of forests and oceans, for example, is affecting the production of oxygen, as a result of which the oxygen content is sinking planet-wide. With glaciers and poles melting extremely rapidly worldwide, as well as permafrost dissolving very quickly, causing methane gases to rise into the atmosphere in many areas. In addition to these facts, more and more damaging factors are appearing, leading to severe catastrophes, especially in alpine areas, as will be the case in Switzerland next week. In this respect, what has been apparent and warned about for a long time is that a large part of the Piz Cangallo and the Bergell will detach itself due to the dissolution of the permafrost, and fall deep into the valley, which will happen several times in succession. Although such an event is not uncommon in mountainous Switzerland, such occurrences will become more frequent in the future, as a result of which, after this event, which will occur next week and be repeated several times in succession and will also cost several human lives, further crashes will also occur in the same area after a week or more. However, many more crashes will follow in Switzerland and also all over the world in other countries on Earth, which will be absolutely unavoidable. The same thing has been happening in various countries for a long time. But in the coming times, the permafrost dissolution will cause it to increase even more, as will the storms, which will become more and more violent and spread to the whole Earth. This also will be proven in a few days, namely in America and the state of Texas, where an exorbitant hurricane, with a speed of around 250 kilometers per hour, far exceeding anything previously experienced in those areas, will cause enormous damage and destruction, far exceeding what was caused by Hurricane Katrina from the 23rd, 31st of August 2005 in Alabama, Louisiana, and Cuba. At that time, some 1,850 human beings died, although in next week's hurricane this large number of deaths will not be reached, but will be much lower, although the material destruction, etc., will be much more extensive and devastating than that caused by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. A total of over 100,000 houses will be destroyed. In addition to bringing massive rainstorms, the storm will also cause immense and devastating flooding after the storm subsides, with human lives also lost. The state of Louisiana will also be affected, but to a lesser extent, while on the other hand, in Asia and South Asia, violent monsoon storms will cause catastrophic conditions and cost many human lives, the number of which will be several thousand by the end of the monsoon season. China and various other Asian countries will also be hit by violent storms that will exceed anything that has ever happened in Europe in this respect. But Africa and Australia, etc., will also not be spared storms and unusual rainfall, with human lives also being lost.
Yes, warnings were not listened to at the time. And it is to be said with regard to what is coming next week in America that the whole thing will be particularly bitter and hard for the majority of those affected, because in the USA there is no insurance for such natural incidents for the homeowners, etc. Consequently, they will effectively be left with nothing due to the destruction of their houses. The U.S. government has not been able since time immemorial, and is still not able today, to enact compulsory building insurance for homeowners by law, as we have in the Canton of Zurich. The building insurance of the Canton of Zurich is called GVZ for short, and corresponds to a Swiss building insurance by which all homeowners in the Canton of Zurich are insured against fire, natural hazards and earthquake damage within the scope of the compulsory building insurance. The GVZ was founded in 1808 and exists as an independent institution under public law of the canton. The GVZ is subject to the overall supervision of the Zurich Cantonal Council, which is also responsible for approving the annual report and the annual accounts. Although the Zurich Cantonal Council exercises general supervision and also determines the valuation circles and the external auditors. The Board of Directors, which consists of 7 members, mainly exercises supervisory duties. The Board of Directors includes ex officio, the responsible executive of the Cantonal Directorate of Justice and Home Affairs, and is responsible for the building insurance institution. In addition to the cantonal government, the board also includes 6 members elected by the cantonal government from the circle of homeowners. The municipalities and the business community, although the management of the GVZ is the responsibility of the directorate. However, it must be said that, as far as I know, the compulsory necessity of building insurance is not regulated in this way throughout Switzerland, which is why it would be urgently necessary for all the governments of all the Swiss cantons to ensure that all buildings are insured without exception, at least and especially residential buildings. Private building insurance, which is offered by various insurance companies, should also exist in addition to the cantonal building insurance. And this is because they also participate financially in cases of damage, which means that damage can be covered financially to a greater extent.
You are well-oriented, but it must be so for your center management task.
Yes, you are right, because being informed about such things is part of my job. But now a question which we talked about during all the days of our work, in which Anjana and Florina were also partly involved, which I still have not brought up. And that is regarding all the conversations we had during the 4 nights, which sometimes lasted up to 4 hours each night. Is it necessary to also retrieve these and write them down? Because the whole thing would be
Work that you do not have to burden yourself with unnecessarily. Although we recorded everything, as we have always done, the conversations that took place are not relevant to be retrieved and written down as official conversation reports. So in this respect, we keep it like all unofficial contact conversations, which you do not have to retrieve and write down, but which are only recorded by us.
which, yes, also refers to all the conversations that happened during private visits. If that was not the case, I would be so burdened with retrieving and writing that I would not be able to do anything else and would have to leave all the other work. But we have also discussed that before. But going back, I want to come again to the tremendous storm in the USA with tremendous destruction, for such storms will, after all, increase in number in the coming time and also become more and more violent, as I know, like all other catastrophes, which will occur more and more frequently everywhere on Earth.
That will be so, and the next great hurricane is already brewing in its origin. And it will develop at the beginning of the first days of September, and is expected to be more violent than the one we have been talking about.
Cannot be any other way. What interests me now, however, is the matter of the expulsion of 755 diplomats from Russia, to which I think that this was perhaps really welcomed by the US president and is in line with his sense, but for which all the anti-Russia people around him in the government will take revenge. Donald Trump did thank Putin for expelling the diplomats, saying that it will save the US a lot of money. So Trump saw it as a positive thing that Russia was expelling the US diplomats from the country. Trump said that the expulsion greatly reduced the salary costs for the US, and that therefore a lot of money would be saved. Consequently, he wanted to say thank you that the US now has a smaller payroll, and furthermore, there was no reason for the expelled embassy staff to return to Russia. It was at the end of July, I think, that Putin ordered a total of 755 staff at the American embassy in Moscow and US consulates to leave the country in response to new US sanctions against Russia. The pathologically stupid, idiotic US sanctions were, after all, devised and imposed as a result of the alleged Russian pro-Trump hacking attacks during the US election campaign and regarding the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. It is also a fact that Putin's decision, which I believe was justified, to kick out the diplomats further strains the already tense relationship with the US. And as it is in the US powers that be behind Trump are really working and will not simply accept the whole expulsion of diplomats. And Trump obviously does not realize that the president is being directed and turned around by the effective rulers behind him, so that he dances to their tune. Or perhaps he is simply cowering, that is clear. Consequently, I assume that a backlash against Russia is being planned against Trump's will by these background US rulers, or rather, by the real rulers who are plying their underhanded trade behind Trump, loosely based on the US system of revenge, tit for tat. In my opinion, this could also be a deportation action of diplomats, as well as US government terror actions against other Russians and businessmen and Russian companies, etc. in the USA. Such a move by the US administration, against Trump's will, is to be expected, I think, as the US already did under Trump's predecessor Barack Obama, who reduced the number of Russian diplomats by 35 and closed 2 Russian recreation centers in the US. Obama, too, swore stone and stone at the time of his election that he would do all the good things, but he was hardly able to implement any of them. Because, as has always been the case with all US presidents and will continue to be the case with Trump, he let those who governed behind him determine everything and he had to be unfaithful to practically all his election promises and failed completely. He may actually be able to carry through a few of his election promises, such as the unpleasant thing regarding the construction of the wall on the border with Mexico, as well as regarding the sans-papier immigrants or those who migrated to the USA without identification papers and their descendants, who are supposed to be a little more than 1 million, as you told me during Trump's election trumpeting. And the way I see it, it will be the same with Trump as with all U.S. presidents, as well as with practically all state powers in the world, that he will not be able to keep his effectively good and valuable grandiose election promises, because those behind him, who really have the power to govern, will turn him around and force him to do what they want, as a result of which they will also prevent him from doing the good, correct, and valuable things that he promised to do. And it is there that I see the great Russophobia and hatred of all the background rulers and those sections of the people who want to turn Russia around in the U.S. manner and make it a U.S. vassal state.
You see the whole thing in a correct way. Because in fact, it will be proven in a short time that your words will become reality. Because anti-Russia political intrigue plans are already being worked out by the rulers behind U.S. President. Trump, as you call the authoritative rulers who really exercise U.S. government power, to retaliate against the expulsion of U.S. diplomats from Russia. Although you recently told me that, as a result of Trump's clumsy and bumpy and boorish behavior, you would call him clumsy because he behaves in a clumsy manner. It is important to bear in mind that he is not diplomatically trained and therefore speaks freely as he sees and understands everything.
Which is actually more honest than mendacious diplomacy.
This is probably correct, but it creates enemies for him from all those who like lies and deceit rather than the truth. Because they do not know how to use their intelligence and therefore can neither perceive in a real way the given facts nor understand them correctly. For this reason, they are not able to perceive anything that is said or simply facts that arise in the given way, and are also not able to think about it so that they would be able to see through the whole thing in its correctness, really realize it and decipher it, which is to be called effective stupidity. And unfortunately, this is also true of the majority of U.S. citizens who believe in and depend on the government, who let those in power think for them because they themselves are incapable of doing so.
If what is given is not listened to correctly and also not perceived correctly in other ways and then misunderstood and twisted, then, in my opinion, this is not only a factor of inattention, but also a fact of a lack of intelligence, or precisely of the fact that the underdeveloped intelligence is not used in a good and appropriate way.
That is probably so, but we have got off the subject, because I wanted to make it clear that in the coming period, and also in the coming weeks, there will be politically hostile intrigues against Russia in the USA, which will have very unpleasant consequences. The anti-Russia and foolish, brash imprudence of the bulk of the U.S. rulers is not only extremely regrettable, but extremely primitive imprudent, unreasonable, and fraught with danger, which will be increased in the coming weeks by the confused dictator Kim Jong-un in North Korea, because no conciliatory efforts are being made from the U.S. side, as sanity and reason would require.
I also agree with that. But it is also to be said that Kim Jong-un is a megalomaniac madman and full of hatred against the U.S., who does not know what deadly delusion he is indulging in and believes that he could defeat the U.S. and U.S. allies. He is completely insane, just like the USA powers that be, who in their delusions of grandeur believe that they can stand up to the North Korea dictator's madness with idiotic threats. The guy is not to be understood, because what he learned in Switzerland, or rather in Bern, where he studied for years under a false name, has certainly not been hammered into his dictatorship. But what I would like to mention now, and we have talked about this before, is that on another occasion, a visitor asked a core group member whether another core group member had already had contact with one of you playaren, which of course had to be answered in the negative. Visitors also recently asked whether you playaren would one day make open contact with the leaders of Earth. If you would like to perhaps say something about this, what has come up earlier regarding both questions?
I can. Yes, for core group members? The possibility of personal contact with us was effectively considered, as you yourself know, and also wanted to make an effort to create the necessary possibility for this. However, the whole thing was made impossible by the unbelievably unreasonable and sometimes even malicious quarrels of various core group members, as a result of which various plans had to be abandoned altogether, and finally the whole thing had to be declared impossible and unfeasible for all time. And this will remain for all times to come, as will also the fact that we Plejaren will finally withdraw from the earth after the end of your life. And as for the question of whether we will make contact with earthly leaders, this too is absolutely clear. Namely that we will not do so under any circumstances, neither at the present time nor at a later or future time. Although we were willing to contact Earth leaders with certain reservations, for which you gave Ellie our demands so that he could pass them on to the U.S. government, we will not do so under any circumstances. Contrary to our demands, however, other and extremely arrogant demands were then passed on to you via LEE by whatever authorities, which were absolutely unacceptable to us and also amounted to an impertinence. And this was because the demands made on us were so high-handed and secretive, as well as secretive that not we but the U.S. government, its secret services and military should have control and might over our contacts with the U.S., which of course we could not accept. We were and are not supplicants, but we offered help and an alliance that would have ultimately brought the United States of America, and later also the Soviet Union, as well as all Earth humans, lasting world peace, and by Earth standards immeasurably valuable technical and medical advances. At that time, as I have already said, we were not supplicants, but our effort was that of a cooperative and helpful alliance, in which a few days later, if the alliance with the U.S. leaders had come about, the Soviet Union should also have been included, and then gradually all the other countries of Earth. Through the alliance, efforts for worldwide peace would have been made first, which would have led to lasting world peace within a few years. However, the state powers, the secret services, and the military of the USA were obviously not interested in this, because they all held on to their positions of power with regard to their governmental authority and were not willing to limit them for the good of the U.S. American and the entire world population and for a real world peace. And that there was no will whatsoever to respond to our peaceful demands was clearly evident from the U.S. response to our request, which was, on the one hand, disingenuous and, on the other, full of counter-demands that were impossible for us to meet. Note Figu, see Plejaren contact reports, 117th contact from the 29th of November, 1978.
Your effort would have been the chance for all of Earth's humanity to finally be able to win a real and lasting world peace. But this was not in the mind of the U.S. powers and their supporters, so also not of the secret services and the military of every kind. Deception and lying as well as intrigues and crimes are also part of their profession, as is also the case with NASA, which to this day claims and therefore lies that the fictitious moon flight with Apollo 11 on the 20th of July 1969 took place. Consequently, the real flight with Apollo 12 took place, after which the next official landing on the moon took place on the 19th of November 1969. The alleged Apollo 11 rocket, you explained at the time, was indeed shot up, but without a crew, after which the landing capsule was jettisoned again and returned to Earth, while the astronauts remained on the ground and experienced the alleged lunar adventure under hypnosis or post-hypnotic influence. However, with a later moon flight, it was probably with Apollo 13 on the 11th of April 1970, a manned moon landing actually took place, during which the tracks were then set that were supposedly made by the Apollo 11 moon landing. This created a second lie, because officially it was and still is claimed that on the way to the moon, the landing had to be cancelled due to an explosion on board the Apollo spacecraft, and therefore only a half-moon orbit with subsequent return to Earth was carried out. The crew, So you told me had also been post-hypnotically treated with a false memory after their return to Earth, following which they were made to believe and set a false memory that they had just made one orbit of the moon.
That is correct, but in this respect it should not be necessary to talk about it again.
You also had in mind that the whole thing should have become official once if everything had worked out. But what was screwed up by the US probably cannot be fixed and cannot be repeated. Or am I wrong?
This is also correct, and you are not wrong. Because through it all, we have clearly realized that it will be impossible for the rulers of Earth, and also for the bulk of Earth humans to have any contact with us Plejaren for a very long time to come. What will happen, however, when the Earth foreigners, who have been moving in Earth space for a long time, or others who will sooner or later appear, which will also only be a question of time, is still open and will be an event that will certainly cause many problems for all Earth humans. It must also be clear that Earth foreigners or Earth future beings do not have to be the same kind as us human beings, because various Earth foreigners are beings who are not human and also not peaceful.
You have said this to me on various occasions in private conversations. But what you said, that there should be no need to talk about the faked moon landing and the alleged orbiting of the moon, I think that is correct. It just came to my mind because of the lying that is practiced by the USA in political matters as well, and also as a result of the machinations with the matter when you tried to get in touch with the US government via LE. But now I have a question in relation to serial killers. Because the other day it was said in a TV program that such could be treatable under certain circumstances, but I doubt that.
Your doubts are justified because human beings who appear as serial killers for pathological reasons are absolutely not treatable. Consequently, they cannot be cured of their pathological compulsion.
The Earthling psychologists, as well as the entire psychiatry, are still very limited, which is why they let themselves be duped and fooled by serial killers and also by other degenerated murderers. As a result of which they let them go free or release them again into freedom, whereby new murders are then committed. By this, however, I do not mean human beings who simply kill fellow human beings in the heat of the moment, out of desperation, or in a deranged state of consciousness, etc., but rather effectively. But effectively only murderers who have degenerated.
Your words clearly lay out what you mean.
What about human beings who kill several human beings in wars, etc., as soldiers, etc.?
Insofar as they do not become mentally, emotionally, psychologically, consciously ill from it or even break, but go along with the killing in indifference or in pleasure or joy, then the killing of human beings remains a permanent and dangerous state which can degenerate into a killing at every appropriately occurring opportunity or situation, whereby this state remains lifelong. Many human beings, if they are conscientious, who become so involved in warfare that they actually have to kill other human beings because they are forced to do so by the laws of the state, very often suffer lifelong psychological damage.
That is about what I thought it might be. Then the following. A human being does not necessarily have to be psychopathically inclined or a full-blown psychopath to be able to kill another human being, just as psychopaths do not necessarily have to kill. Am I wrong?
What you say is correct, because psychopaths, despite their predisposition, can control themselves and keep themselves free from such deeds, whereas, however, human beings who are completely normally predisposed are also capable of killing other human beings, whereby a wide variety of motives can be given for this, which are usually founded in degenerations that cannot be controlled by the persons concerned who kill. However, if it is a matter of jealousy, hatred, revenge, or retaliation, then the most diverse motives that appear in normal human beings do not come into question, because jealousy, revenge, or retaliation are emotionally psychopathically determined.
Aha. Then you could say that, for example, death penalty advocates are emotionally psychopathic, and so are therefore somehow psychopathically predisposed in some form.
Not only could you say that, but it actually corresponds to a form of psychopathy.
Good, thanks, that's clear now. Then this. Time and again it is said on television, just recently again, that Emmanuel alias Jesus drank wine from a chalice together with the disciples during the so-called Last Supper, whereby this must have been very valuable. This chalice is said to have been preserved, but has disappeared to this day. It is assumed to have been found in various places in Jerusalem, but also in Greece, France, Spain, and England, where it is said to have been taken. The house where the Last Supper was held, which consisted only of bread, fruit, and wine, as I know, belonged to a wealthy Jew, which is why it is also assumed that the chalice was very valuable. For my part, however, I know that Emmanuel did not think much of ostentation, and therefore also avoided ostentatious drinking vessels, jewelry, and anything of value, for he was very modest in every respect. I also know that he and his disciples always carried their own small drinking pouches made of animal skins to quench their thirst on the way, while, when they were invited to a house, they took their libations from simple drinking bowls. As your father Sfath once explained to me, it was also like this at the evening meal, where small drinking bowls made of alabaster were used, which were about 10-12 centimeters in diameter and about 4 centimeters deep. Sfath once showed me one such drinking bowl that he received from his great-grandfather and cherished because it came from Emmanuel's group, he assured me.
This small bowl is now in my possession, and indeed only such small drinking bowls made of alabaster were used at the Lord's Supper. That a chalice was used does not even correspond to a legend, but to an effective lie, which was already thought up and spread by early Christians. The truth is that the drinking bowls were alabaster bowls made in Italy in Volaterrae and brought by the Roman occupiers to Jerusalem and also to all Roman-occupied territories. This already happened when Jerusalem was conquered by the Romans in 63 BC. At that time, the alabaster drinking bowls were very popular with the Romans, although they were not of great value, and were also popularly used in small groups and circles in the occupied regions, so also by Emmanuel and his disciples.
And how then did the lie that a cup was used in the Lord's Supper come about?
About the lie that when Emmanuel was hanging on the cross, a cup was used to catch his blood, which never really happened. This tall tale led to the Grail legend, which is still circulating all over the world. Also because in the course of time, various valuable chalices were fraudulently produced, which were given the nimbus Chalice of the Last Supper and Chalice of the Blood, whereby 2 of these fraudulent chalices were produced in Europe.
Sfath already explained this to me, as well as another Grail story, though the actual Grail is a place with a source. I would like to pick out an explanation of this for repetition in the contact blocks, and then insert it here in our conversation instead of many words.
Excerpt from the 469th Contact Report, Pleiadian-Plerian Contact Reports, Volume 11, pages 412 to 413.
And so this truth is also given in the book Goblet of the Truth, of which a first part, and that is the teaching of Enoch, was also called Cauldron of Life by the Druid prince Merlin alias Merlin, and has nothing to do with the alleged Grail of Christianity, which is based only on lies and deceit, never existed, and in which therefore also the blood of Emmanuel Jesus was not collected by Joseph of Arimathea at his crucifixion. The real Grail existed only as a holy place, and in the Cauldron of Life was enclosed the scriptural work, a writing of the teaching of the true prophet Enoch from the sieve of Nocedemian. The document was given as a copy of Pleiera Caradwina, the threefold goddess, to the Druid Merton the Laughing One, who was later commonly called Merlin. Merton poured the copy into the chalice that became known as the Cauldron of Life, which through Christian adulteration was fabricated into the Grail, which however cannot be associated with it in any way, because the Grail was a place with a spring, surrounded by trees and plants, where the Druids used to do their meditations. And this Christian corruption of the Grail has been handed down from its inception to the present day, but again in another egregious corruption which claims that it is the chalice or Grail of Emmanuel Jesus, from which Emmanuel and his disciples drank at the Holy Supper, and in which Emmanuel's blood was then collected at the crucifixion by Joseph of Arimathea.
You can do that, of course.
Good. Then my question about Volaterrae, was that a town?
It was a town in Italy called Volaterrae in Latin, which is now in the province of Pisa, region of Tuscany, and is called Volterra, and corresponds to a town of about 10,000 inhabitants. It is located about 50 kilometers south of Pisa and about 50 kilometers from the Mediterranean Sea.
Oh, I am familiar with the town of Volterra, and it is considered one of the most beautiful towns in Tuscany with its spectacular scenic surroundings. It really is very beautiful there, as I could see for myself when I was there once. If I remember correctly, the city is dominated by a Medici fortress now used as a state prison, and Volterra is enclosed by a medieval city wall.
Yes, that is correct. The Fortezza Medicea, or fortress, was built between 1561 and 1563 on the orders of the Florentine Duke Cosimo I de' Medici. It is effectively a fortress, which is also known as Forte Santa Barbara. Volterra is also still a center for alabaster processing, as it was in the 4th century BC, when the town was formed by the union of several small Etruscan settlements dating back to the 7th century BC. At that time, the Etruscans built a 7-kilometer ring wall around the United City, which they called Velathri.
When I was in Volterra, a priest told me, if I remember correctly, that the history of Volterra goes back as far as the Neolithic period, and there is even evidence of settlements from that time. That is about all I know about this town, but perhaps you can add something else?
Yes, but not much, for only a little is known to me, such as that in the 8th century BC Emanuel Chari. There was an Etruscan settlement on the hill, which was annexed to the Roman Empire in the 3rd century BC. The Teatro Romano, of which large parts are still preserved, also dates from this period. But Volterra, it is worth mentioning, has been known since ancient times for the extraction and working of alabaster, with numerous craft workshops still in existence today, exporting their products all over the world. The Etruscans were also known for their alabaster work, in particular also for the drinking bowls mentioned by you and I, as well as for cinerary urns and all kinds of vessels, etc.
Thanks for your additional comments, which brings me to my next question. I have accumulated quite a few in the last few weeks, especially because I had a partial amnesia due to my severe physical and mental breakdown, and had therefore forgotten a lot. Everything was so bad that I
just functioned and no longer knew who you were and what you were doing.
Yes, thanks to my ex-wife. Even today I cannot comprehend my actions that brought me a few millimeters close to death. It's been a long time though, probably close to 40 years.
Yes, next year it will be 40 years ago, because your breakdown was on the 17th of July, 1978, and recorded in the 111th official contact conversation.
If I had still been able to think clearly and had known.
But you did not, because you were out of your senses.
I guess I was, but let's not go there because it all went well and it's over. It just came back to me earlier that it could have been the end of me then if Eva had not been so responsive, for which I am more than grateful to her.
It was a very nasty time with your wife then, and all through the marriage, which was also actually the reason for your life-threatening breakdown.
That was the case, yes, but we really do not have to talk about that anymore. It was really just a memory attack. So let's talk about something else, like the story of Berenger Sauniere *, 11th April 1852 in Montazel, plus the 22nd of January 1917 in Rennes-le-Château, a priest in Rennes-le-Château, France, about whom speculative stories and conjectures are repeatedly broadcast on television. They spint that the priest had found a treasure, etc., or even the so-called Jesus Graal. What is repeatedly broadcast on television can also be found on the internet. For example, the following two statements on Wikipedia.
Berenger Saunière was the eldest son of Marguerite and Joseph Saunière. After him 3 more sons and 3 daughters were born. The father was mayor of Montazels, manager of a mill and administrator of the castle of the Marquis de Cazermajou, and then of Monsieur de Bourzes. Brother Alfred became a priest. Brother Joseph died at 25 while studying medicine. Berenger spent his school years at the St. Louis School in Limoux. In 1874, Saunière entered the seminary of Carcassonne. 3 years later, he was ordained priest and began his ministry as vicar in Alette-les-Bains. In 1882, he was transferred to La Clatte and appointed professor at the seminary of Narbonne. However, because of disciplinary incidents, Saunière was transferred to Rennes-le-Château, where he took over the parish on the 1st of June, 1885. Saunière was openly anti-republican, and was therefore forced by the prefecture to leave his parish from December 1885 to July 1886, after which he returned to teach at the seminary. Under pressure from the city administration, however, the prefect revoked his decision. In 1890, in addition to the very small Rennes-le-Château, Saunière was now also assigned Antugnac as a parish. Saunière advertised in many religious journals, including Semaine Religieuse, La Croix, L'Éclair, L'Express du Midi, to obtain mass grants. He then received numerous letters with money orders. From his notes, one can deduce that between 1896 and 1915, he received payments for at least 100,000 masses, of which he was only able to read a few hundred each year. Through this income, he became a wealthy man. Saunière renovated the small village church of Sainte Marie Madeleine and redesigned it together with Henri Boudet. In 1902, the priest got a glass eye. He lived with the Denarnaud family in the rectory. However, he got on very badly with Marie Denarnaud's mother. He therefore preferred to stay in the building he had had built next to the cemetery. A year later, a dispute arose between Saunière and Boudet, who had accused his friend of a lifestyle unbecoming a priest. During a visitation, the new bishop of Carcassonne, Monseigneur Paul Félix Bouvin de Beauséjour, demanded an account of the origin and use of Saunière's funds. The priest tried to prevent the accounts from being disclosed by calling in sick several times. Several attempts at defense followed, during which Saunière is said to have declared, among other things, that he had found a treasure, but the bishop saw through this. Saunière finally declared that everything belonged to his housekeeper, Marie Denarnaud. In 1911, Saunière was removed from office suspensus ad divinis. He remained in Rennes-le-Château, however. His successor, Abbé Marty, was not successful. The inhabitants of Rennes-le-Château, whom Saunière had also cared for financially years before, had not forgotten him, and came to Saunière's masses in the winter garden of his Villa Bethania. However, the flow of money now stopped. The priest had to sell much of his private property. Saunière appealed to Rome, and after making a penitential pilgrimage to Lourdes, was reinstated as parish priest of Rennes-le-Château. With this longer internet excerpt, various pictures, documents and drawings are attached, which I cannot copy out and therefore cannot reproduce, but which can be found at www.gralsouch.eh. Rennes-le-Château is a small village in the Pyrenees, on a hill above a high plateau, about 40 kilometers from the medieval city of Carcassonne. In the time of the Visigoths, the place was called Radi. In 1645, a shepherd was looking for a lost sheep in the area of Rennes-le-Château. He found the animal, which had fallen into a crevice after a long search. When the shepherd went down into the crevice, he found some skeletons in boxes filled with gold pieces in a cave. He took some of these riches and returned to his village. The good man, because he did not tell anyone where he had found his treasure, was eventually condemned as a thief and executed. In 1885, a priest named Bérenger Saunière was called to Rennes-le-Château. When Saunière took up his post, he found the village church of Rennes-le-Château in an extremely dilapidated state. He therefore decided to borrow money from the Rennes-le-Château community to renovate it. Saunière also befriended a young woman, Marie de Narnaud, who became his housekeeper and confidant. During the restoration work, Bérenger Saunière found the entrance to a long-forgotten crypt, the crypt of the Seigneur de Rennes, under a stone floor slab dating from around the 8th century, which showed the image of 2 knights on its underside, presumably the seal of the Knights Templar, and a vessel with gold pieces which one of his predecessors, the Cure Antoine Bigot, had probably hidden there in 1792. Whether there really is a crypt under the church of Rennes-le-Château can unfortunately no longer be determined with certainty today, because on the one hand there is a strict ban on excavations in the whole town after treasure hunters have dug indiscriminately in Rennes-le-Château in wild actions and even carried out blasting, and on the other hand, it is also not possible to visit the crypt mentioned. In the further course of the renovation work, Bérenger Saunière discovered a cavity in a pillar dating from the Visigothic period while lifting the altar slab. In this cavity were wooden cylinders containing 4 parchments. These parchments were inscribed with texts in Latin and French. Saunière immediately stopped all work and traveled to Paris to have 2 of the documents examined by an expert. On this occasion, he bought 3 copies of paintings in the Louvre. He then returned to Rennes-le-Château, convinced that a treasure must be buried under the church. Bérenger Saunière and Marie de Narnaud began to search for the treasure, because one of the parchments contained units of measurement and also references to a grave which was located in the churchyard. This tomb was the final resting place of the Marquise Marie d'Aupule de Blanchefort. The inscription on the gravestone was very strange and seemed to indicate a secret or a secret hiding place. If you look at this gravestone in the inscription, you can see uneven characters and incorrect word separations. The gravestone of Marie d'Aupule de Blanchefort was, according to further research, designed by Abbé Antoine Bigot. In any case, Saunière destroyed the gravestone with the enigmatic inscription. Fortunately, however, this had been recorded before and is therefore known. Saunière probably did this because he wanted to prevent anyone else from solving the riddle. 2 of the parchments, which can no longer be found at present and probably date from 1244 and 1644, are supposed to be genealogies. The other 2 parchments are from more recent times and could have been written by Saunière's predecessor, Antoine Bigot. These newer parchments contain Latin texts from the New Testament. If one parchment is examined closely, one notices an irregular arrangement of the letters in certain parts of the text. Certain characters have been placed higher in the text. If one now writes out these characters and reads them, the following text results. A Dagobert tu roi et a Sion est se trésor et il est la mort. This treasure belongs to Dagobert II, king and Sion, and it is there waiting, sleeping unused, dead. Asterisk Dagobert II was a king of the famous Merovingian dynasty. He was assassinated in the year 678 AD in the Ardennes by order of his own chancellor. Unraveling the other parchment was far more complicated. The author of the Holy Place, Henry Lincoln, was able to break the encryption code and found the following text. Bergère, pas de tentation pour Poussin Teniers, gardant la Clefpax, 681 par la croix et ses cheval de Dieu j'achève ses démons de gardien, à midi pomme bleue, shepherdess. No temptation that Poussin. Teniers possessed the key, P681, by the cross and this horse of God I end destroy this demon of guardian to noon, blue apples. Well, the priest Berenger Sauniere must have stumbled upon a great secret, because all of a sudden he came into a lot of money, which began to flow almost inexhaustibly from unknown sources. He renovated the whole church much more extensively and beautifully than had originally been planned. The surrounding area was also redesigned according to his instructions in a peculiar way. In addition, he built a tower near the church, the Tour Magdala, in which he housed his library. From this tower and its terrace you can enjoy a magnificent view of the surrounding area. An artistically designed garden with rare trees, water features, and exotic plants completed the picture. The land he bought was registered in Marie de Narnaud's name in the land register. The parish priest also built a new access road to the village for the Rennes-le-Château community, and was very generous in financing charitable projects. The whole village benefited from his mysterious wealth. Berenger Sauniere also changed socially, as he cultivated contacts with important personalities from politics, art, and culture, and often received visitors in his villa Bethania, which was also newly built and equipped with a private chapel. What might Berenger Sauniere have found? This question preoccupied and still preoccupies many people, and one heard the most diverse conjectures. Some spoke of the treasure of the Merovingians, others of the immeasurable treasures of the Knights Templar. There was also speculation that Sauniere might have found the legendary Holy Grail. Or is the treasure of Rennes-le-Château the treasure from King Solomon's temple, which the Romans are said to have stolen during the occupation of Jerusalem? The priest also maintained contacts with his colleague and friend Abbé Boudet, cure of the neighboring village, Rennes-les-Bains. Boudet was also a local historian and writer, and wrote, among other things, the cryptic work La vraie langue celtique et le cromlech de Rennes-les-Bains, The True Celtic Language and the Stone Circle of Rennes-les-Bains. This book is an enigma in itself and certainly holds a coded secret. The area around Rennes-le-Château and Rennes-les-Bains is basically very mystical. One finds many traces from Celtic times. Boudet's brother was a surveyor and contributed a map of the area to the book. This map shows many dolmens and menhirs, as well as other special features, and probably also points to a treasure hiding place. The two priests were often seen roaming the area together. Sauniere himself often traveled alone, sometimes also together with his housekeeper Marie de Narnaud. He went fishing, hunting, or looking for special stones and mushrooms, he said when asked what he was looking for days in the gorges, forests, and caves in the area. Sometimes a few boys followed him secretly, but Sauniere often disappeared in the area of Rennes-les-Bains, near a large stone called Pierre du Pin. It was suspected that Sauniere had made some of the treasure he had found into money, but the priest remained silent, and he also never said anything about a possible place of discovery. It could also be that someone gave the priest a lot of money in order to conceal something. This is not far-fetched, because if Berenger Sauniere really stumbled upon a big secret, it should also remain secret from now on. One possible grouping could be the church itself, for example. The name of a secret order called the Priory of Sion also came up in this context. This secret order is said to have existed for about 900 years, and to have been related to the Knights Templar. The Order of the Knights Templar ceased to exist in 1314, but the Priory of Sion is said to be still active today, and to be in possession of evidence that proves that the Christian Jesus survived the crucifixion depicted by the Church. It is also believed that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, who fled across the sea after the crucifixion story and entered mainland France at Sainte-Marie de la Mer. The offspring of Mary Magdalene and Jesus' marriage were to have ascended the throne in France a few hundred years later as Merovingian kings. If you visit the church of Rennes-le-Château, you can read above the entrance portal the words, Terribilis est locus iste, this place is terrible. In the church itself, one is confronted with the sight of a devil statue. It carries the holy water font in a crouched position and looks with a frightened expression towards the center of the church floor. Because of the posture of the devil called Asmodeus, one thinks that he should actually be sitting. The fact is that in Rennes-le-Château's neighboring town, Rennes-le-Bain, there is a stone on a mountain that is shaped like an armchair. This stone probably dates from the time of the Celts and is carved with very interesting symbols. This stone is called Le Fauteuil du Diable, the Devil's Chair. For what reasons do you think Saunière had the inscription placed above the entrance and the statue of the devil erected? Above the holy water basin, 4 statues of angels are placed on a pedestal. Each of these angels performs part of the sign of the cross. Below the angels is written, Parce sine tu le vaincras. By this sign you will defeat him. One of the angels points downwards, presumably the devil Asmodeus is meant. The rest of the church is decorated in an extremely symbolic and enigmatic way. Each station of the Stations of the Cross deviates in detail from the official ecclesiastical version. What might all this mean? The priest Berenger Saunière encoded a message in his church visible to everyone, and yet incomprehensible. At that time, when the priest Saunière traveled to Paris to have the parchments he had found checked, he bought, as already mentioned, 3 reproductions of paintings in the Louvre. One of them was a painting by Nicolas Poussin, entitled Les Bergers d'Arcadie, the Shepherds in Arcadia. In this painting there are 3 men and a woman in front of a stone sarcophagus. 2 of the men are pointing to an inscription with their fingers. The inscription on the sarcophagus reads, Et in Arcadia ego Y2 in Arcadia. It is remarkable that such a tomb, as shown in the picture, actually existed not far from Rennes-le-Château in Arques. However, it is not known for how long it stood there. It has since disappeared. If one compares the picture with the real surroundings, one discovers great similarities of the landscape around Rennes-le-Château. The saying, E.T. in Arcadia ego, can also be recognized, relatively easily encoded, on the mysterious tombstone of the Marquise Marie de Hautpoul de Blanchefort. In Carcassonne, a new bishop came to power who no longer tolerated the peculiar behavior of his subordinate parish priest. After several disputes, some of which reached as far as Rome before the Pope, Saunière was finally replaced by a new parish priest. But Berenger Saunière continued his life and his benefactorship in Rennes-le-Château until he died in 1917. His housekeeper Marie lived a very secluded life from then on and died in January 1953. To this day, the treasures in and around Rennes-le-Château are constantly being searched for, but any discoveries are carefully kept secret.
The following list is intended to provide an overview of which treasures in particular might be involved. The treasure of the Templars. When the Pope destroyed the Order of the Templars in 1307, all attempts to find their riches have failed to date. It is said that the noble house of de Blanchefort was closely connected with the Order of the Templars. In 1156, Bertrand de Blanchefort had a kind of underground structure built in the area of the Château de Blanchefort. It remains unclear to this day why he had this work done. Was it to serve as a hiding place for the Templar treasures? Or was there something else hidden there that could perhaps become a danger if it fell into the wrong hands? The treasure of the Visigoths. The legendary wealth of Saunière could perhaps actually have come from a treasure find, which can be proven insofar as Saunière richly gifted some of his fellow officials from the surrounding area with ancient things. such as a very old and very valuable communion chalice and a large quantity of coins from the 6th and 7th centuries. According to legend, the heirs of Mary Magdalene married into the families of the Visigoths, and thus formed the origin of the powerful ruling family of the Merovingians. According to this, the Visigoths of the area could trace their ancestry back to the house of Benjamin, who allegedly fled to Greece to the region of Arcadia. Under pressure from the Franks, the Visigoths moved their capital to Rheti. The Franks continued to invade and the Visigoths moved from Rennes to Toledo. Had they left all their riches here in hiding? The treasure of the Merovingians. It is possible that the treasure Saunière discovered was part of the Merovingian crown treasure. Not much was known about the Merovingian kings until recently. According to legend, the founder of this royal lineage, Merovech, was descended from two fathers. His mother, while already pregnant with Merovech by King Clovis, is said to have met a Kinotaur while swimming in the ocean who seduced her. And so somehow Merovech was formed by mixing Frankish genes with those of a strange amphibian creature. The Merovingians never cut their hair and wore a characteristic birthmark red cross above their shoulder blades. They were known as followers of the secret doctrines. The ancestors of the Franks were called people of the bear. They worshipped the bear goddess Arduina. The word Arcadia comes from Arcus, patron god of this area in Greece, the son of the nymph Callisto, sister of Artemis. Callisto's constellation is also known as Ursa Major or the Great Bear. According to her legend, the Merovingians were descendants of the Trojans, and Homer records that Troia was founded by a colony of Arcadians. A treasure in 12 hiding places, Abbé Boudet, who spent his life in Rennes-les-Bains, suspected that there was not a single hiding place but 12 different ones, guardians of the 12. They are said to be hidden in the region of Rennes-le-Château or Rennes-les-Bains. A document that questions the Gospels. Yet another theory suggests that Jesus did not die on the cross, that he came to France unnoticed, and spent the rest of his life near Rennes-le-Château. He would have married Mary Magdalene and had a child with her. Some even claim to have evidence that Jesus was buried in this area, hidden geometry around Rennes-le-Château. In 1973, the writer Henry Lincoln investigated the mystery of Rennes-le-Château. He consulted a professor of art history, Christopher Cornford, and a skilled surveyor, David Wood, to begin a detailed investigation. To everyone's surprise, Cornford discovered that the painting was set up like a pentagon, a secret symbol that the church would never actually allow in a work of art. Wood suspected he would also find the same arrangement in the surrounding area, and therefore surveyed the area. After considerable effort, Wood discovered that there were some lines on the map that were connected with an angle of 36 degrees. He next looked for the circle that was related to the lines. Finally, he found that this ran through the old churches of Rennes-le-Château, Custausa, Serres, Bougarac, and Saint-Just-le-Bézu. In addition, the circle ran through the chateau at Serres and the strange rock formation at Les Toustounes. Wood knew he had arrived at something very important and published his research in the book Genesis, the first book of Revelations. Some of the churches could be dated back to the Romans or the Visigoths, well before the time of the Templars. So both Poussin's painting and the landscape have the same geometry, which begs the question, how could Poussin have known this? Also from coded documents? The actual parchments had allegedly only been discovered when Saunière carried out the renovation of the Church of St. Mary Magdalene and removed the altarpiece. Were the copies forgeries, and did the originals actually look quite different? The Philosopher's Stone or Saunière's Stargate. According to a completely different theory, Saunière discovered a gateway to another dimension here, in the form of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. These are said to represent a so-called tesseract, a kind of arrangement of hypercubes as a three-dimensional image of a four-dimensional body. On these tablets would be philosophical texts that Thoth himself is said to have written down.
So these are the two excerpts from Wikipedia. about which programs are shown on television from time to time, and it is debated what of all the claims now corresponds to reality and what does not. So I want to ask you whether you are familiar with this story, and if so, what you really think about it and what is true.
I am indeed familiar with the whole thing, as I am also familiar with various other stories that deal with treasure hunts and the like, as well as with conspiracy theories. But in answer to your question as to what is really true about the story of the priest Berenger Saunière, the truth is that he received numerous large sums of money over a period of about 20 years from very wealthy citizens of various places, whom he assisted in dying and for whom he also said masses. They were not, therefore, sums of money obtained by him through the sale of treasure, nor were they gifts or the like, as also not in connection with the alleged Jesus Graal, which never existed, but they were bequests of large sums of money and valuable objects to the priest for the repair of the church at Rennes-le-Château.
Then one could say that all the sums of money the priest received were, so to speak, thanks to him and to the church for administering the last rites to rich dying people at their deathbeds. Precisely the sacraments of penance, anointing of the sick and Eucharist, respectively, which are administered to the dying, at least in the Catholic faith.
That is correct. This was the activity of the priest Berenger Saunière, for which he received, in hereditary fashion, the quite substantial monetary allowances.
So nothing about a treasure or grail or any other nonsensical claims. Then that is also clear. But what about the fact that also on television programs are repeatedly brought about the witchcraft in the Middle Ages, whereby during the witch hunts, contrary to your earlier statements of around or more than 9 million witch burnings and other witch murders, only there about 200,000 to 250,000 human beings called witches and sorcerers are said to have been murdered, as is claimed today.
The whole of these false allegations can be traced back on the one hand to the direct lying machinations of the Catholic Church, but on the other hand also to chroniclers paid by the inquisitors and the Church, who compiled chronicles of lies in this respect. According to our very accurate annals, more than 18 million human beings, women, children, and men, have been murdered as witches, sorcerers, or otherwise as being possessed by evil demons or the devil in all countries of the earth since the beginning of the Inquisition until today. And this has been the case up to the present time in all the main earthly religions and their sects, as well as in other religions and sects, although through Christian Catholicism alone and its sects, as well as through other Christian denominations and sects, some 9 million women, men and children have been murdered as witches, sorcerers, and demon-possessed, etc. However, the fact that many children, mostly young people, were also murdered in connection with the witchcraft and demon craze has always been denied and is still denied today. Although such murders still take place in isolated cases, for example through exorcism, or also still through witchcraft and sorcerer murders. So this still happens today, and not only in so-called third world and underdeveloped countries, but also in the industrialized countries that are considered enlightened. Although these murders are usually not recognized as such, as is also the case with regard to murders in families and in kinships that go unnoticed.
To this I remember you saying some time ago that in families and kinships in Switzerland about 400 and in Germany about 4,300 murders take place per year, whether for reasons of money, inheritance, pity, or nuisance, without being recognized as such.
Unfortunately, these murders are increasing the longer, the more, as a result of increasing greed for money as well as indifference. Also, specifically, aging family and relatives are killed because they are frail, sickly, and uncomfortable and need to be cared for. Thus, such human beings become a nuisance for some family and relatives and are murdered, whereby it is added that in many cases they want to be inherited, but these murders are never recognized as such and thus never atoned for.
It cannot be any other way, because the know-it-all attitude prevails everywhere, especially among experts and scientists. who always have to revise themselves when, for example, calculations, data, and events occur that they have calculated or assessed incorrectly, as is also the case with landslides in Switzerland. Various areas at risk of landslides are scientifically monitored, and mountain movements are constantly measured and registered, but the actual falls are only assumed. As a result, human beings then lose their lives when they are suddenly and unexpectedly surprised by mountain and glacier falls, as will also be the case next week in Bergel, as you said.
What you say is indeed true, because many of the earthly experts and scientists in all fields of knowledge are narrow-minded and arrogant, and often have to revoke and revise their false findings and results, which is usually very difficult for them. This is also the case with regard to specific times of mountain and glacier collapses, as a result of which human lives will be lost. However, this will be somewhat different in the case of the next glacier collapse in Switzerland, because the collapse will at least be calculated approximately correctly in terms of days.
So there will be a glacier break-off next time?
Yes. On the morning of the 10th of September, about 2 parts of an unstable glacier tongue from the Trift Glacier will come down in the form of an ice avalanche above the village of Saas-Grund in the canton of Valais, although this will not pose any danger to human beings or their achievements.
So then in this case, at least the clarifications and calculations of the experts and scientists will be correct.
Whereas in Bergel, however, the events will be predicted according to very inaccurate calculations, and therefore there will be a catastrophe.
Which, however, as usual, probably cannot be prevented.
Unfortunately, no.